As you know, my name is Angelique Davis. I'm an assistant professor of political science at Seattle University. And I've had a rather, I guess, non-traditional way of getting into this position. I'm also a licensed attorney and do continue to do occasionally some legal work on the side from my academic duties. I attended law school at the University of Washington, and then after law school I practiced for about 6 years. I did judicial clerkship as well as worked in private practice as well as in the public sector. And then while I was doing that, I also lectured for a few years, teaching up at Seattle University. And then the opportunity came for me to consider a full-time position. And so I decided to do that, and I took a non-tenure track temporary 2-year visiting assistant professorship. And after that went on the national market for positions and ended up getting an offer from Seattle University as well as other institutions. And that's how I ended up with the tenure track position that I'm at today. Now, to answer your question regarding mentorship and how that's assisted me, I have to say at every step of this process, right, my entire educational process in my career, there have been a series of mentors who have been instrumental in me getting to the point where I am today. So I definitely couldn't have done it on my own. And I would have to say that there have been mentors, there have been some who've been more constant, who have mentored me over the years and I've had consistent relationships with. And then there's others who have been for specific reasons or perfect for a particular season in my life, you know, for a discrete area and something that I was dealing with that have been willing to offer their experience and expertise. I've had about 8 people approximately that have been consistently mentors for me as far as people that I've been able to consistently call upon to provide advice. And so those individuals, I say, have been more constant, not all at the same time, right? So at different times. So when I was in law school, there were some people who were really helpful for me, you know, and how to navigate law school and getting out with my career and my first job. And then the same thing when I was in practice, as far as we all know, when you first start practice, you know, even the small things like what should I really wear in court, you know, how do I deal with this partner in the firm that's asking me to do these things and it just doesn't quite seem reasonable? How do I say no in a graceful way? To then my decision to switch to an academic career, and there have been a few individuals who have been very helpful throughout the process. But those are the people who've been more constant and that I've been able to call on consistently and have a consistent relationship. But there have been a number of individuals who've been willing to just say have coffee with me, maybe help shepherd me through a search process or a job process or through some difficult situations. Occasionally they've been friends of mentors who, you know, the mentor has said, you really need to talk to this friend of mine about this situation. It's been very helpful to have access to that type of community. So I would say that there have, you know, been very varied ways in which the mentoring relationships have taken place. And I think it's important to know that one person isn't going to be able to be everything for you, right, for a mentor. So there's some people who are going to be excellent for certain aspects of your career or what you're trying to do. And, you know, sometimes those people, you know, they may be the person you want to ask about professional advancement, but maybe they're not the person to ask to be your mentor or help guide you through work-life balance. Maybe there's somebody else that will be a good person to give you guidance with that. And so, you know, I've had people in each of those areas. The ones that stand out to me that actually didn't work were ones in which I was a part of a formal mentoring program. I can remember actually in law school, we were, I don't know if it was randomly assigned or if they put much thought into it, but we were assigned mentors when we were new students. And I recall we had this big mentorship like reception where we're supposed to meet our mentors, and I remember my mentor didn't show up and then didn't really follow up at all, and so obviously that didn't work out very well. Or I've had some other situations where I've been assigned a mentor but it wasn't actually someone that I had developed a relationship or a connection with. It was more something that was kind of like a matchmaking type of scenario. And for whatever reason, we just, it's not that they were bad people or poor mentors, we just didn't click in the way where I felt comfortable in really asking them the types of questions that I needed to help me with my career. One of my mentors I feel comfortable mentioning by name, Judge Monica Benton. I actually clerked for her, but I met her when I was in law school. And she came to the law school where I was at the University of Washington and spoke to students. And like a lot of us do when we go and speak to students, she offered to be willing to mentor us or just to meet with us if we would like. And so many students never follow up, right, when people offer that. Well, something about her I really liked, and so I did follow up with her. And while as a law student, sometimes I go down and sit in her court or other judges' courts and just observe because I was curious. And over time we developed a relationship, and then we found out we knew people in common. And later on, after I'd been in practice, I applied for clerkship when she was a federal magistrate and was able to be her clerk for a couple of years. And so we have kept in touch over the years, and she is one that has been someone I would consider a mentor. Even though I've gone in a different career path now as far as the academic path, we still keep in touch. I feel like she will always be my judge. Once you've clerked for a judge, you feel that way. And even if we go for a period of time without talking, I always know that I can call on her for advice and career advice. And so she has just been one of a few people that I can mention that have been really just tremendously helpful and instrumental throughout my career. And that's one relationship that's just, I have to say, has been phenomenal. All of us have some type of adversity at different points in your career, and I definitely have had mine. It's just some general areas I can think of to address, from just the usual starting a career to also being a woman of color, and usually not many people, or being the only person that looks like me wherever I've practiced or worked. And that bringing some uncomfortable exchanges occasionally with coworkers, to now having young children, and I wouldn't say that's necessarily adversity, but it brings a level of juggling and trying to manage your life. And to, just like all of us, sometimes you have health issues or there's things going on with your family. And so again, when I've talked about, there have been some people who've been constant mentors, like Judge Benton for me, but then there's others who've been really helpful during specific, points in my career. And like I said, there's some people that I've really gone to as far as work-life balance, or other successful women who've done a really great job at still succeeding in their career, while also having a successful family life and relationships, which is important to me. And so I've found that being able to find some people like that and develop this network and actually identify those people before a crisis hits, so that, because life inevitably will bring those in your way, it's just how life works, I've decided, or accepted, I should say, not decided, now that I'm been doing this a little while, has just really been so helpful, I think, in making me feel like I'm not alone, and like I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel, that somebody else has done this. And even if I don't do it the same way, just that reassurance that there's other people out there, that they can share their ideas with me and how they've done something, and then really help me to come up with what will be the best plan. I still have my mentors, right? And then I have students who I mentor because I do direct our pre-law program. I'm a faculty member who advises a lot of students. And then I have other people who are starting out in the profession in different areas that I do mentor. And for me, that is just an absolutely critical part, I believe, of just my professional and personal life, because of how much I've benefited from these relationships. And so one of the things I always say to younger people when they're like, oh, thank you so much, I say, well, you make sure to pass it on, right? So I'm not going to do this for you and take my time unless you do this later when you're in a position to do that, because I feel that's really important to pass it on. But so I think in finding that time, it's something that you decide is important and that you're going to make time to do. And then I think, like we talked about, mentoring relationships are different, right? So there's some who I spend a lot more time with, but most it's just being available, right? So, for a phone call, I have some former students who will call me, since I teach the undergraduate level, they're at law school, they'll be away for a few years and they'll call me right before finals like, I'm panicking, or even some that have called, a few years out before the bar exam, and I've just kind of helped talk them through it, right? So, that might be a more discreet type of thing, or an email, or some success, or advice for them to succeed in their career, or letters of recommendation. And then there's others, right, who I've established a more formal relationship with. And then, of course, I have to really be judicious on who I choose to do that with and spend that time with. People call it the old boy network. You can call it whatever type of network you want to call it, but there are a lot of women, right, a lot of people of color who oftentimes just aren't as privy to certain networks and certain information that's exchanged, right? I don't golf, so I miss out on that, right? So, or so people say you aren't, you're not out on the golf course, or maybe certain types of, like I said, social networks in which they're engaged, in which you just have this exchange of information. And so I do think, and there's actually a lot of academic literature to back this up regarding who is in your social network, regarding your demographic background and the type of connections that you might have. And so I think we really need to be intentional, if you're underrepresented in the profession in some way, in providing that network and that support for people. Right? Because if there's, and so not everybody who I mentor needs to be a person of color or woman. That's not the case. But it is important that I am aware of that, and I think that others are, because often when there's not other people like you, sometimes people aren't as comfortable with you because you look different or you come from a different background in the environment, that we avail ourselves to help make opportunities, to pick up the phone, to call somebody we know, if someone needs some information, to help establish more of a network for people to have access to more leadership positions and to advancing in their careers. I mean, I can think of all kinds of things, from being in private practice to who gets on what assignments, to even now that I'm in the academic world, where you place your publications, where you get invited to speak, if you get called for media to ask you about certain issues that you're working on, and just the exposure that you get. And those type of things come from your networks. You can work as hard as you want, but if people don't know what you're doing, they're not going to recognize what you're doing. And so I do think it's really important for us, and that's why I say it's just a critical part of me as a person, and also my professional plan, to do that mentoring, because I think it's critical for all of us to succeed. Well, I think you always keep those things in mind. I think it's actually impossible for it not to inform your experience, whether it's conscious or not. Because we're all of us come from our various backgrounds, and so situations in which we're comfortable might be different. So as I talked about, I've had different mentors for different things. So there's some mentors who've been fantastic in providing me some very clear professional advice, but they're not necessarily the people that I go to say, do I have to wear pantyhose in this environment, or do I, is it okay for me to do, certain things that I might not feel as comfortable, say, asking someone else, because I'm concerned about maintaining a certain image. And I think, at least for me, and I think a lot of people are like this, not always, because you can't always, just because someone is from the same background as you doesn't mean, right, you're going to have a connection necessarily. But more often than not, that can help, right? Because you at least have some common circumstance to relate to, but not necessarily. But I do think it's really important, because it can help with that. And even if it doesn't necessarily help with that level of comfortability, I think particularly in underrepresented groups, just in knowing who the other people are in your field and in your area can be really helpful in allowing access for more people from your particular background. Picking who you mentor or who is your mentor is really important. Again, it's less of a big deal for the more discrete types of situations in which you consult with someone. But for that long-term mentoring relationship, I was actually just with a number of women this last week who've really helped mentor me in my career. And one of the things is they're really busy, they're really high-powered, and they don't want to waste their time if I'm not going to listen. Right? And so it was actually kind of funny because even though I feel like I'm far enough along in my career that I have a lot of independent judgment, they're like, look, I'm not going to waste this time on you unless you're just going to do it. Like there's some stuff you just really need to follow through on, because if I'm going to sit here and spend these hours with you and you could do something completely opposite, just don't waste my time again. And so I think, in picking that, not that you're going to necessarily do exactly everything, but in really finding someone whose advice you value and who you're really going to take to heart what it is that they're helping you through, right? So if you choose to do something different, that you're maintaining that relationship, you're able to articulate why, that you're not wasting their time, I think is the bottom line, right? It's not so much you have to do exactly what they say, but that it's that you're not wasting their time. And you're actually genuinely considering what they're sharing with you and valuing their expertise. And I do feel that same way when I mentor other people or students. And, I can think of a few people who, asked me specifically on some things, like what they should do. And of course I shared it with them. It's up to them how they want to handle it, but then they go and do the exact opposite and they're calling me later crying, to help get them get out of a mess or to get a new job or something like that, and to make some phone calls. And I'm thinking, well, you've, bent my ear a few times already and I've spent a lot of time, and now you're in a mess because you didn't listen and you want me to pull some strings for you. I'm just not so sure at that point, right? So I think that's one of the things to think about, is that you're really taking this seriously. It's not that you're just, shopping around, especially when you get someone who's really higher up in their career, is really busy, doesn't have as much time to spend. And then I think really being able to identify, not necessarily with them so much, but within yourself, what it is that you are seeking from them, right? Because again, I was talking about there's some people who, their area of expertise could be really different than yours, but for me, there's some women who've been really successful, and I really like how they've been able to maintain their personal relationships with all of it and their family life. And I personally think balance is a myth when you're in this type of environment. I think it's more just learning to handle the chaos, I think, and balance it all and not drop the balls that you're juggling, to somehow juggle them. So, and that's what I've settled upon. But those have been people who, maybe I don't do wills and estates, or I don't do a certain area of constitutional law, but they understand the demands that I'm facing in my career and are really helpful in how I can navigate my time and a lot of decisions I'm making in that regards. I definitely think it's possible, and I have seen it happen. It hasn't necessarily been my experience, and I think that's partly too because I've taken a lot of initiative to recognize my need for a mentor and to seek people out. But I've never gone up to them and said, will you be my mentor necessarily, right? It's just been developing a relationship, or I need advice or something. But I do think, with these programs in spending time and really identifying somebody. So I think those ones where it's just kind of matchmaking, like, oh gosh, we have a bunch of 2Ls who need a mentor. Let's just put together the list of alumni we have and just match them. That's a little bit harder, but when you're actually taking the time to identify characteristics and goals that are in common, I definitely think that provides avenues for more connections. I also have seen other mentoring programs that have worked well, where there have been a series of events or things that people have done throughout the mentoring program, at least while it's an official program. So like luncheons or interactions or, requests for like, shadowing someone for a day or something, but where there's actually, a series of things in which they're asked to commit to at the outset, so that you have this at least initial period of time to really get to know each other. And then usually, oftentimes those will continue. In the profession, there's always going to be people who are vastly different from us and who are actually invaluable resources and important for us to get to know professionally. And so stepping outside of that comfort zone and making a point to have coffee or to stop by the office of someone who you might not necessarily feel that instant connection with can actually lead to, and it has quite a bit for me, to relationships professionally that have been invaluable, and also help me to what we could call bridge also into other networks in which I've been able to receive a lot of support in my career. And so I just really encourage people to, of course you want to start with some people you feel comfortable with, but to also seek out those who you might not immediately approach, and to not let feeling a little bit uncomfortable or nervous about that deter you from that, because that really is important for our professional development. Most people are happy to try to help somebody out in their career, and to provide their perspective, right? It might not be what we would say is the gospel or exactly how you have to do something, but their perspective on how to navigate something. And so I think, for example, as a student, sometimes I would look to see who are some people in the legal community who have jobs that I think I might like. And sometimes I would just cold call, or I'd see if there's maybe somebody I know out of the blue to see if I could have coffee to do an informational interview. And then when you do that, you have to make sure you're prepared, right? So that you know exactly what it is that you need to talk to them about, that you know enough about their career that you're not wasting their time again, right? So that and that you follow up with a thank you and all of that. But there have been other things like, my career now, I have young children. Looking around and seeing, gosh, who are some other women on my campus who are successful, not necessarily in my area, but are doing well as far as their publications and their teaching. They don't look completely exhausted all the time like I feel. And so identifying those people, and again, approaching them and saying, hey, would you mind just having lunch with me? I'll treat. I'm just really wondering how you're doing this, and just being honest with them, right? And I haven't been turned down yet. So I think, and then the same thing, occasionally, if someone's practicing in a certain area, once you're in practice, or now that I'm in my academic work, sometimes making sure that I go to certain conferences, or where I'll meet certain people who I know are working in a similar area, so I can identify those people. Or when I was in practice, just through different CLEs or different bar association events, identifying people that I could actually meet, and introducing myself and then following up with them. And so I think it takes deliberate focus on your part. It's not just going to happen. It's not going to just be like manna falling from heaven, right? Sometimes it is, but most of the time it isn't. It'll take you following up and making a concerted effort to make these types of connections. But it is well worth your time to do that, because it's actually so invaluable to your career.